Avoidance is not the opposite of love, it is the highest form of self-protection a wounded nervous system knows how to perform, and most people spend their whole lives mistaking it for indifference. Something happens inside a person the moment they stop running. It is not romantic, it is not soft. It is a psychological event most therapists cannot explain and most partners never witness because by the time it happens, the relationship has already ended in the avoidant person's mind. What you are about to learn is not a manipulation tactic. It is a map of the exact internal mechanism that turns emotional distance into emotional obsession and why the people who understand this stop chasing anyone ever again. There is a moment buried inside every avoidant nervous system where safety becomes unbearable. Nobody has explained that moment to you until now. Human beings are not wired to fear closeness. They are wired to fear the version of themselves that closeness reveals. This is the first misunderstanding almost everyone carries into love, and it is the reason so many relationships collapse under the weight of a mystery neither person can name. The avoidant person is not afraid of you. The avoidant person is afraid of who they become when they need you. That distinction changes everything because the moment you understand it, you stop taking their distance personally and start seeing it for what it actually is, a defense mechanism built long before you ever entered the room. Psychologists who study attachment often describe avoidance as a strategy, but strategy implies choice, and choice implies awareness. Most avoidant people have neither. What they have instead is a nervous system trained in early life to associate emotional need with danger. Somewhere in their history, reaching out was met with silence, or worse, with punishment disguised as indifference. A child who cries and receives nothing eventually stops crying, not because the need disappeared, but because expressing it became more painful than suppressing it. That child grows into an adult who mistakes self-sufficiency for strength, when in truth it is often the residue of an old, unhealed abandonment. Here is the paradox almost nobody talks about. The very independence that makes an avoidant person attractive is the same independence that will eventually make them run from anyone who gets too close. Confidence and avoidance can look identical from the outside. Both project calm, both appear unshaken, both seem immune to emotional chaos. But confidence is rooted in security, while avoidance is rooted in fear disguised as composure. Learning to tell these two apart is one of the most important psychological skills you will ever develop, because pursuing one will build you a life, and pursuing the other will slowly dismantle your sense of self. Chasing does not create desire. This is a harsh truth, and most people resist it because chasing feels like effort, and effort feels like it should be rewarded. But the nervous system does not reward effort. It rewards unpredictability paired with safety, which is a far more complicated formula than most relationship advice admits. When you chase an avoidant person, you are not proving your worth. You are proving their internal narrative correct. The one that says closeness always comes with pressure, and pressure always precedes loss of self. Every text sent in desperation, every question asked in anxiety, every attempt to explain your feelings more clearly confirms the very fear that caused the distance in the first place. There is a hidden irony inside this dynamic that almost nobody addresses. The person doing the chasing often believes they are fighting for love, when in reality they are fighting against their own unresolved fear of abandonment. This is the part of the cycle that destroys people quietly, because it is rarely about the avoidant partner at all. It is about an old wound that gets reopened the moment someone pulls away, and the chasing becomes less about winning the other person back and more about soothing a panic that has nothing to do with them. Two wounded nervous systems collide, each one convinced the other holds the key to their peace, when neither of them has learned how to generate that peace internally. Empaths are often praised for their emotional depth, but few people examine the shadow side of that depth. An empath's greatest strength, the ability to feel deeply and give generously, can quietly become a form of self-abandonment when it is not balanced with boundaries. The empath does not chase because they are weak. They chase because giving love has become their primary way of feeling worthy, and withdrawal from the other person feels like a direct threat to their identity. This is the unspoken tragedy of empath and avoidant pairings. One person fears being consumed by intimacy, and the other fears being irrelevant without it, and both of them are, in their own way, terrified of the same thing, which is losing themselves entirely inside another human being. What makes an avoidant person start chasing is not a technique. It is a shift in psychological gravity. As long as you remain the one pursuing, you confirm their unconscious belief that love requires vigilance and control. But the moment you become fully at peace without them, something extraordinary happens inside their mind. Their nervous system, which has spent a lifetime bracing for engulfment, suddenly loses the threat it was defending against. There is nothing to run from when nobody is chasing, and in the silence that follows, the avoidant person is left alone with a question they have spent years avoiding, which is whether their own emptiness was ever truly about you, or about a fear they inherited long before you arrived. Silence is often mistaken for punishment, but true psychological stillness is not about withholding affection to manipulate someone into returning. It is about reclaiming your own nervous system from the chaos of uncertainty. When you stop performing for someone's attention, you are not playing a game. You are interrupting a pattern that has controlled you for far longer than this relationship has existed. Most people cannot tell the difference between strategic silence and emotional maturity, but the avoidant person can feel it instantly because manipulation carries an energetic residue of resentment, while genuine peace carries none. They can sense whether your calm is real or performed, and only the real version has the power to move them. Desire is not created through effort. It is created through unresolved tension, and tension only exists where there is uncertainty about outcome. An avoidant person who knows exactly how you feel, who has never had to wonder, who has never experienced a version of you that exists independently of their attention, will rarely develop obsession. Obsession requires mystery, and mystery requires a self that is not fully accessible. This is not about playing games or manufacturing false unavailability. It is about becoming a person so anchored in your own worth that your presence in someone's life is a privilege they must rise to meet, not a guarantee they can take for granted. There is a deeper layer beneath all of this that most people never reach because they are too busy analyzing the other person's behavior to examine their own. The real transformation does not happen when the avoidant person starts chasing you. It happens the moment you no longer need them to. That shift, subtle and almost invisible, is the single most powerful force in any relationship because it removes desperation from the equation entirely. And desperation, more than distance, more than silence, more than any personality type, is the true killer of attraction. What most people fail to understand about desperation is that it is never really about the other person. It is about an intolerance for uncertainty, a refusal to sit inside the unknown without immediately trying to control it. The moment uncertainty enters a relationship, the nervous system panics, and that panic disguises itself as love. It whispers that you must act, must reach out, must fix the silence before it becomes permanent. But love does not panic. Love can wait, because love is rooted in security, not in urgency. Desperation, on the other hand, cannot wait, because it is rooted in fear, and fear always demands immediate resolution. Consider the psychological difference between a person who waters a plant because they trust it will grow, and a person who digs it up every day to check the roots. The second person is not more devoted. They are more anxious, and their anxiety, however well-intentioned, is what kills the very thing they are trying to nurture. Chasing an avoidant partner is digging up the roots. Every message sent to demand clarity, every attempt to force emotional honesty before the other person is ready, interrupts a process that can only unfold naturally. Growth cannot be rushed without being destroyed in the process, and this applies to trust exactly as much as it applies to anything alive. There is a peculiar kind of arrogance hidden inside the belief that you can talk someone out of their fear. Fear does not respond to logic. It responds to safety, And safety is not something you can argue someone into feeling. This is why explaining your feelings more clearly, defending your intentions, or proving your loyalty rarely works on an avoidant partner. You are attempting to solve an emotional problem with a rational solution, and the nervous system does not operate that way. The body does not calculate trust through paragraphs of reassurance. It calculates trust through repeated experiences of consistency without pressure, which is something words alone can never manufacture. Consistency without pressure sounds simple, but it may be the most difficult psychological discipline a person can practice because it requires tolerating your own discomfort without transferring it onto someone else. Most people confuse consistency with constant contact, when true consistency is actually about emotional steadiness regardless of whether contact is happening at all. An avoidant person can feel the difference between someone who is calm because they are secure and someone who is calm because they are suppressing anxiety in order to appear secure. Suppression leaks. It shows up in the tone of a message, in the timing of a reply, in the subtle need to know where things stand. Real steadiness does not leak because there is nothing being hidden underneath it. Here is an insight that rarely appears in conventional relationship content. The avoidant person is often more self-aware of their patterns than people assume, but self-awareness without emotional safety changes nothing. Knowing you have a fear of engulfment does not dissolve the fear. It simply gives you language for something your body still experiences as a threat. This is why intellectual understanding is not enough to change behavior, not for the avoidant person and not for the one who loves them. Insight creates the map, but only nervous system safety creates the willingness to walk a different path. Many avoidant individuals privately grieve their own inability to stay close to the people they care about, yet grief alone does not override a threat response built over decades. The empath in this dynamic often carries an unspoken belief that if they love hard enough, deeply enough, patiently enough, they can become the exception to someone else's pattern. This belief feels noble, but it is quietly self-destructive because it places the responsibility for another person's healing onto your own worth. You did not create their fear, and you cannot outlove a nervous system into feeling safe if that person is not doing their own internal work. Loving someone through their avoidance is not the same as loving yourself while someone works through their avoidance, and confusing these two things is where so many good people lose years of their life waiting for a version of someone that never fully arrives. What almost nobody says out loud is that healthy detachment is not coldness. It is one of the most advanced forms of emotional maturity a person can develop because it requires loving someone without organizing your entire identity around their response to you. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means your peace is no longer negotiable based on someone else's ability to show up. This distinction matters enormously, because the moment your emotional stability depends on another person's consistency, you have handed them a kind of power that no relationship should require, and the avoidant partner, whether consciously or not, will sense that dependency and instinctively retreat from it, not out of cruelty, but out of an old fear that being needed that intensely will eventually mean being trapped. There is a strange kind of freedom that emerges once you stop needing someone to choose you in order to feel whole. This freedom is not resignation, and it is not giving up. It is the psychological equivalent of standing on solid ground instead of shifting sand. From that ground, you can still hope for connection, still desire closeness, still care deeply about the outcome, but you are no longer dependent on it for your sense of self. This is precisely the energy that avoidant people are unconsciously drawn toward, not because it withholds affection strategically, but because it does not require anything from them in order to remain intact. Ironically, the less you need their reassurance, the more capable you become of receiving it when it finally comes. Most people believe that love requires constant proof, but the deepest forms of connection are built in the spaces where proof is not demanded. An avoidant person tested repeatedly for reassurance will eventually associate the relationship with performance, and performance breeds exhaustion, not intimacy. But an avoidant person given space to move at their own pace without abandonment and without pursuit, often discovers something they were not expecting, which is curiosity. Curiosity is dangerous to a nervous system trained on avoidance, because curiosity requires leaning in, and leaning in is the exact behavior avoidance was designed to prevent. When an avoidant person begins to lean in voluntarily, it is rarely because someone convinced them to. It is because something inside their own internal experience shifted, and that shift can only happen in an environment free of coercion. There is a hidden mechanism inside the human mind that scientists call intermittent reinforcement, and understanding it will change the way you see every relationship you have ever struggled to let go of. When reward arrives unpredictably, the brain does not lose interest. It becomes obsessed, chasing the next moment of connection with far more intensity than if that reward had come consistently all along. This is why some avoidant relationships create a grip so powerful it feels almost chemical, because in many ways it is. But here is the twist almost nobody explains. This mechanism cuts both directions. The avoidant person is not immune to it. When affection disappears unpredictably, when warmth is no longer guaranteed, their own brain begins searching for the reward it has lost, and that search often looks exactly like chasing. Grief is not only something that follows loss. Sometimes grief precedes it, quietly living inside a person long before anything actually ends. Many avoidant individuals carry an anticipatory grief they cannot name, mourning closeness before it even has the chance to threaten them. This is why some avoidant partners seem to sabotage good relationships at the exact moment things become stable. Stability does not feel safe to a nervous system that has only ever known love as conditional or unreliable. Instead, stability feels like the calm before an inevitable collapse, so the avoidant person unconsciously creates distance to control the timing of a pain they believe is coming regardless. Consider the psychological concept of self-fulfilling prophecy and how devastatingly accurate it becomes inside avoidant relationships. A person who believes closeness always ends in abandonment will often behave in ways that make abandonment more likely, not because they want it to happen, but because confirming an old belief feels safer than facing the terrifying possibility that it might not be true. If it is not true, then the wound they built their entire identity around might have been unnecessary, and that realization can be more destabilizing than the original pain itself. Some people would rather be right about their suffering than risk discovering they never needed to suffer at all. The empath partner in this dynamic often unknowingly participates in that same prophecy, though from the opposite direction. Fearing rejection, they overextend, over-explain, and over-function emotionally, trying to secure a connection that cannot be secured through effort alone. This overextension frequently triggers the very withdrawal they were trying to prevent, creating a loop where both people are reacting to fears that have almost nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with wounds formed long before they ever met. Neither person is the villain here. Both are simply reenacting an old script neither of them consciously chose. Here is a psychological truth rarely discussed in mainstream content, and it may be the most important insight in this entire script. Emotional safety is not created by certainty. It is created by tolerance for uncertainty without collapse. Most people believe that if they could just get a guarantee, a label, a promise, they would finally feel secure. But security built entirely on external guarantees is fragile, because guarantees can change, and people can leave regardless of what they promised. True security is internal. It is the ability to remain grounded even when outcomes are unclear, and this single shift, more than any communication technique, is what ultimately determines whether someone becomes genuinely secure in relationships or perpetually anxious inside them. Attraction at its core is not built on comfort. It is built on the perception of value that exists independently of you. This does not mean playing hard to get, because playing a role is exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. It means becoming someone whose life, identity, and sense of purpose are not contingent on being chosen. When your value is self-generated rather than externally validated, something shifts in how others experience you. You stop emitting the subtle scent of neediness that, whether people can name it or not, they instinctively sense and instinctively pull away from. Neediness is not a character flaw, it is simply unmet internal security leaking outward, and it repels precisely the kind of connection it is trying so desperately to attract. There is a reason ancient philosophy so often returns to the idea of detachment as a form of strength rather than a form of coldness. The Stoics understood something modern relationship culture has largely forgotten, which is that peace cannot be outsourced to external circumstances without becoming perpetually unstable. If your peace depends on someone else consistently choosing you, you have built your entire emotional foundation on something you cannot control. But if your peace depends on your own character, your own discipline, your own relationship with yourself, then no amount of distance, silence, or unpredictability from another person can fundamentally destabilize you. This is not resignation. It is architecture. It is building an internal structure so solid that external chaos no longer determines your internal state. An avoidant person chasing you is not the ultimate goal, though it often feels that way in the moment. The real transformation is becoming someone who no longer requires that chase to feel whole, because that shift changes every relationship you will ever have, not just this one. People who chase validation attract people who withhold it, not out of cruelty, but because withholding becomes the only way to maintain a sense of power in a dynamic that already feels unbalanced. But people who no longer need validation attract an entirely different kind of connection, one built on mutual respect rather than emotional hierarchy, because there is no imbalance left to exploit. What almost nobody tells you is that healing your attachment wounds will not necessarily make an avoidant partner change. Sometimes it simply reveals with painful clarity that they were never capable of meeting you where you are, and that revelation, though devastating, is also liberating because it finally removes the burden of believing their distance was ever something you could have loved away. Some people are not ready for depth, not because depth is unavailable to them permanently, but because their nervous system has not yet developed the capacity to hold it without fleeing. You are not responsible for building that capacity in someone else. You are only responsible for refusing to shrink your own depth in order to make someone else's fear more comfortable. The final layer of this entire psychological structure is perhaps the hardest to accept, because it removes every external excuse and places the responsibility squarely back on you. Whether someone chases you, stays with you, or eventually chooses you fully, none of it defines your worth, because worth was never something another person had the power to assign in the first place. It was only ever something you allowed them to influence. The moment you reclaim that power, permanently, not temporarily, not as a strategy to make someone else want you more, but as a genuine internal truth, you stop playing a game you were never meant to win through pursuit. You start living a life so full, so anchored, so undeniably your own, that anyone who wants to walk beside you must do so from a place of choice, not obligation, and anyone who cannot meet you there was simply never meant to walk that far. There is only one truth left standing after everything you have just heard. You cannot think your way into being chosen, and you cannot love your way into someone else's readiness. What you can do starting today is stop performing peace and start actually building it. Sit with the discomfort of not knowing instead of reaching for your phone. Choose stillness over explanation, discipline over desperation, self-respect over reassurance. This is not about winning someone back. It is about becoming someone you no longer have to abandon in order to keep. The avoidant person may chase you one day, or they may not, but either way, you were never meant to spend your life waiting to be picked. You were meant to become someone worth being picked by, and then live so fully that it stops being the point. Peace was never something someone gave you. It was always something you were meant to build.